Today we welcome our very own Vicki Dirksen, a partner here at Plaid Swan, as she discusses her 20 plus years of experience in the industry, some common miscommunications that take place, and how she approaches everything using her magical analytical mind.
Welcome to our podcast, Vicki.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, so why don't we start out by just having you tell us a little bit about yourself, such as how long you've been in the industry, what are your favorite parts of your job, all that good stuff.
So I'm one of the partners of Plaid Swan, so technically I'm Emily and Cassie's boss, but they're going to be nice to me today anyway, regardless of that. I've been in the marketing and advertising industry for over 20 years. I actually had to do the math. It's been exactly 23 years. So I first started out in this industry working for a newspaper research firm, and I know that they still do employ newspaper research firms, but definitely not the backbone of a marketing plan like it once was. The things I love about working in this industry is I'm a data junkie, so I love analyzing all the different kinds of data and how people utilize, get reached, how they utilize information, what makes a big impact with people, and then working with clients and how it connects to what their goals are, what they want out of their media plan. I also feel like I entered the industry at the right time. I've been told over the years that it was the wrong time to get into media. I feel like for me it was the right time because it's changing at a very rapid pace. And being a data junkie, I get access to more data now than I've ever had in my entire life before. And how traditional media utilizes the new media options with social, digital, podcasting, video blogs, that whole realm of it, and the tracking and options that are available to media planners like myself and to businesses are much more varied than they ever used to be before. And I think on some level, some of the traditional media don't even know what they can actually do. So sitting down and working with the radio stations to figure out how to best, not just radio stations, but with any media outlet, about how to best utilize their media is probably one of my favorite parts.
Awesome. So it kind of seems like you've come full circle from newspaper research to media research.
Yep.
All the data in between.
Yep, all the data in between. And then figuring out what data is worthwhile and what is not is also kind of an interesting conundrum at times.
Oh, I can imagine.
So in terms of the media buying, what steps do you take when you're preparing to purchase radio time specifically?
Well, I'm going to probably not answer that question directly because I'm not a big fan of a one media approach. So I like to use a lot of different media, not just radio or not just television or not just digital, simply because as consumers, we don't use one sort of media. So it's very rare to find someone who only reads the paper or who only listens to radio or only listens to this one station. So for that reason, I typically don't recommend clients do one media approach because you're going to only reach one segment of who you really need to reach. But typically with working with radio, I explain how it fits into the bigger mix, highlight its pros and cons because it has some very big pros and cons. And for the most part, try to figure out with them, what makes sense to reach their goals, like which stations, which formats, which times of days. We also discuss things like added value, which is, the extra stuff on top of your commercials. I try to talk with them about alternative ways to use radio beyond just advertising, things like on-air interviews, sponsorships, promotions, partnerships, anything that ties in with their buy so that they get more exposure beyond just the commercial that runs. And then the last step for me really is passing it off to the creative to talk about their messaging and the creative needs for their campaign. Are they going to run one commercial? Are they going to run multiple commercials? Which stations get which commercials? Who are they trying to reach and what do they want them to do? And then their production options. Do they want to work with the radio stations to produce it? Do they want to produce it elsewhere? Do they have their own production capabilities? There's just a lot of different parameters with it. But it's, I think, unusual for people to realize that creative is the last thing I worry about. I worry much more about which stations fit with who they're trying to reach.
That makes sense, though.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who has a lot of experience in purchasing radio spots or other media, what communication issues do you come across, if any?
The most common is the wrong spot running at the wrong time on the wrong station. It happens more than you know. Not so much anymore because I have most of the reps I've worked with for years, or the stations know me, and so they know what my expectations are. But sometimes it's just a miscommunication error. There's only 4 letters with call stations for radio, so sometimes it's really easy to type the wrong letters and then you have the wrong spot on the wrong station. That's the most common. It doesn't really happen that often, so just because I said it's the most common doesn't mean it happens a lot. But it's the one that I get. Political. So what we call in the media world the political season is typically like 2 to 3 months prior to an election time frame. So this last November, we just had midterm elections, and that was a political season. Most people don't realize this, but when you buy media, that's a horrible time to be buying media because you're going to get bumped. The stations are required to provide their lowest rates to political entities, which means that if you're paid a lower rate than the political entity, you have to get bumped. And so that time of period, my email and phone is busy with spots getting bumped and having to get rescheduled or moved to after the political season. So that's also something that, I guess, a communication issue, if you will. For some of it, for some clients, depending upon the situation, there's also communication issues with, staying on top of the start and end time of the schedule. For instance, one of our clients is very sensitive to weather. And so running radio spots around weather and trying to determine if they're going to be open because it might be raining and that would impact their ability to be open. So there's a lot of last minute communication, start, stop, change spots to accommodate all of that. So
Sounds like you have to be very detail oriented at your job.
I don't know. I guess I just take it in stride, but probably, yeah. I definitely feel like there's a lot of information in my head that if I had to communicate it to someone else, it would be very difficult to do. It's kind of like learn as you go sort of thing.
Totally.
So how do you catch those types of things? Like if something runs on the wrong station at the wrong time, I mean, is somebody just always listening? Do they provide like data for that?
Well, I would love to say that I'm usually the one that catches it, but most of the time I get a phone call from a client, and it would be so-and-so heard this spot and it's not supposed to be on this station or it's running incorrectly. I will say that's not limited to radio. I have the same issue with television and billboards, but it's usually brought to my attention by somebody else. Sometimes the stations will say, are you sure this is what you want to run, which is the best scenario because then it gets caught up front. But again, it doesn't happen that often, but usually, unfortunately, it's brought to my attention by an outside entity. And you see this, and the other thing I also want to illustrate is this happens to everybody, and it happens now like on Pandora and Spotify as well, which, by the way, are also radio. They're just online stations. If you ever hear people talking about like a Black Friday sale, but it runs on Saturday, that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
So you know what I'm talking about, that they run, they're like, hey, our Black Friday sale ends Friday, and then you'll hear it Saturday. So even the big agencies run into this issue, because I've heard that for places like McDonald's, Home Depot.
Oh, I've totally heard it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's when we talk about a common error, it's, when I say common, it's common across the industry. So.
Okay. So have there been any intimidating aspects to purchasing radio time? I mean, you're pretty experienced in the industry, but could you think back to when you first started doing it, maybe?
I went through some classes, which kind of helped me with all of it. I also had a pretty decent mentor at the time that kind of took me through how they approached it, and started working mostly with local radio stations, so I knew the reps, and that all really helped in terms of the intimidation factor. I'm a very analytical thinker. And so for me, I get stuck in the numbers. So probably the most intimidating part is trying to get equal distribution, both horizontally and vertically. And before you ask the question, I will explain what that means. So on radio stations, you typically buy radio by day part. So you'll buy like in segments of hours. So what they call are the two big drive times, which is morning AM, which is 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., and afternoon PM, which is 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. Those are the drive times. Those are when people are most likely to be in their cars, so there's a higher possibility of them listening to radio. They're also typically when you spend the most money. So when I'm buying radio, if I specify I want a drive time, it's likely going to be at a higher rate than if I just choose run of station, which means it would run any time the station chooses your commercial to run. So when we talk about distribution of commercials, horizontally, that means day of week. So if I choose run of station Monday through Sunday, that means that the station can choose the day and time that my commercials run. And there's a risk with that because they could choose to run them all on Saturday morning. which means you've now limited the exposure of your message. Now, I have never worked with a station that's done that. I'm just saying that is a possibility because
Sounds
you're
evil.
not. So horizontal distribution means that you want them to run equally each day of the week. Vertical distribution means you want them to run equally during time of day. So if I say, let's say I was buying 3 commercials that I wanted to run in morning drive time. Remember, morning drive time is 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Now, the station could run all 3 of those commercials at 8 a.m. or in the 8 a.m. hour. That's not good vertical distribution. Good vertical distribution would be if they ran 1 at 6, 1 in the 7:30, and 1 at 9:15. So they're separated out vertically. So that's some of the most intimidating side of it, is getting back the invoices. So after your commercials run is really the only time you have to evaluate your vertical and horizontal distribution. Because on the invoice, they tell you approximately it's within 10 minutes when your spot ran. So I have a chart that I put that into and take a look at horizontal and vertical distribution, and then go back to the traffic person at the station and work with them to resolve it. Typically, anything that runs outside or doesn't give good distribution horizontally and vertically, I'll negotiate free spots or additional spots or make up for that. But that's a very long answer to your question.
So I guess you kind of already went into your organizational strategies by you use charts. Is there any other ways that you organize your, why can't I think of a word to put right there?
Radio time.
So organized radio time. So there's a lot of different things to think about. And it wasn't until, I sit down with you guys that I realized how complicated, because to me it just seems pretty simple. I've been doing it for 2 decades. But I think that, there are a lot of things. Another one is once we determine the messaging that the client's going to run, we have to determine if they're going to run multiple messages, which messages take priority, which stations do they run on, and are there any instances where you can connect those, where you might not want to have it run. So remember before I said we have a client that's weather related. So if it's raining outside, they may choose to run one commercial versus if it's not raining, they might run another. Well, that means that you have to work very closely with the traffic person at the station to watch the weather to determine which one runs, which they don't like to do because it's not connected to the weather as easily as you could, by the way, can do with digital billboards. But there is some of that. The other thing is, like I said, if they're running multiple commercials, so let's say they're promoting 3 different things, we have to work with the client to find out which of those 3 things has more importance, or if they're all equal. Because if they're all equal, then you tell the station to run them equally. But if 1 or 2 have higher importance, when you send the traffic instructions in with those commercials, you have to tell the station, hey, you're going to run commercial A 40% of the time, commercial B, I do my math in my head, 35% of the time, and the remaining time goes to commercial C. So there's a lot of different things that you have to organize, but you can do a lot of it up front, which I think is the nice piece of it.
Okay. Wow, this seems hard for me.
I'm glad you have the detail orientation down.
It's a good thing this isn't in our hands.
We'll focus on the message. You got the purchasing side of it.
So have there ever been clients that you wouldn't recommend doing radio to because of their industry or just maybe the nature of their business or something like that?
Not so much industry nature of the business. I mean, I have told people it's not worth doing radio. Most of that comes down to things like budget, not having enough money for it to make an impact, or how complicated their message is. So, radio, you have like 15 to 30 seconds to get your message across. That is not a lot of time. So if you have a really complicated message, it's not the right medium for you. Or if their audience doesn't listen to radio. So if they're trying to reach an audience, and I run into this a lot right now, with trying to reach, let's say, Gen Z, not big radio listeners. So if they're trying to reach that generation, radio may not be the best fit for them. It just depends upon what their goals are. But in terms of like one industry overall, it would be very difficult to say because every situation's a little different.
Got it. So, do you have any advice for small business owners looking to purchase radio time or other forms of media to really get their message across to their listeners or media consumers in general?
Yeah, my biggest piece of advice would be clear about who you want to reach and what you want them to do. And I think that's the core of any industry, of any strategy, whether it's PR or media. It's if you're not clear about who you want to reach and what you want them to do, then your focus is going to be off base. Because that helps you determine which stations, because every station format reaches a slightly different group of people. It also helps you determine your messaging and your approach. So if, for instance, your restaurant that is trying to promote happy hour, well, 8 a.m. rush hour traffic might not be the best time to promote your happy hour message. But definitely, like 5 o'clock, 5:15, promote happy hour, 4 o'clock. That's why being very clear about what you want to accomplish and what you ultimately want to track to ensure you're getting your investment makes the most sense. Flip side of that is understanding what you're buying. Ask a lot of questions. Make sure that you understand what they're selling you, because they'll throw a lot of stuff in, and just make sure you understand what that means. Things like ROS, which means run of station, you can get really good rates for that, but you want to ask for things like no overnight so that you're not running at 3 a.m. and paying for it. A lot of times they'll give you that stuff for free. And then that's the third piece, is ask for added value. So in addition to my purchase with your station, what else can you do for me? Can I come on air and talk about my business? Can I get some free spots? Can I get tacked on to a sponsorship or promotion you're doing, which would make sense for my business? Can I give you things to give away on air, because they do contests and stuff? So, try to figure out a way to extend your buy. But those would be the 3 things I would tell people.
And then going back to your Gen Z point that you made about radio, so have you bought like Spotify or Apple Music ads or Pandora ads for clients then to target more of that demographic?
I have. I've actually done purchases with both Spotify and Pandora. I have not done Apple Music. All you Apple fans out there, Apple is notoriously difficult to work with. Just FYI. But Pandora and Spotify, I have bought on both of those and done a lot of targeting with them. I kind of like it because you get to marry both the online and the digital component. Most stations as well, you can buy online radio through them, because most stations offer an online signal. So if you download an app that allows you to listen to stations online, just like podcasts, you can do that. So a lot of your ads can also appear via like your local station online. Is there anything you want to know specifically about Pandora and Spotify?
Yeah, so I guess I'm assuming there's a local aspect to it. So do you know how that's measured at all, or is that more out of the realm?
Well, they're both different. Pandora has a much more local focus than Spotify does. Spotify tends to focus most of their efforts on reaching larger communities. So when I, for instance, did a campaign with them reaching the Chicago area, it made a lot of sense for Spotify. They're very focused on you have to reach a larger population to work with them, and they require a larger minimum investment. I believe the last time I did it, it was $10,000 a month minimum to tackle Spotify. So most small businesses don't have that kind of money to throw at something like that, but that may have changed. It has been about a year since I've done Spotify. Pandora, on the other hand, the minimum monthly investment with them is $5,000, and they are flexible. So if you decide that you want to spread that out over a period of time, it's not really monthly. You could do a quarterly investment for $5,000 with Pandora. Just their minimum investment is $5,000. They will allow you to target, and in both cases, they'll let you target by age, demographics, behaviors, that kind of thing. If you've listened to either one of them, I'm not sure how necessarily good their targeting is. For instance, I get a lot of Spanish ads at my house, but nobody in my house speaks Spanish except maybe my 16-year-old daughter. So I'm not really sure why I'm listening to Spanish ads. So I think whoever purchased those ads, probably needs to go back to who their target audience is and kind of narrow that down a little bit. But it just depends on who you're trying to reach, what you're trying to do, your minimum investment. I have done Pandora campaigns reaching, smaller markets like Dubuque, as well as larger markets like Minneapolis or Chicago.
Okay. Maybe one of your daughters has been listening to Despacito too much or something, so they're targeting you. I guess that pretty much answers my questions. Do you have any more, Emily?
Nope.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on our podcast. Next month, we're also going to be releasing 2 episodes. We're going to talk about target markets and audiences, and then Ashley Levitt of the Corridor Business Journal is going to come and talk to us about event planning.